Welcome, and thank you to everyone for joining us for the Michigan Online Visionary Educators event. My name is Monica Miklasovic. I'm a partnerships manager with the Center for Academic Innovation at the University of Michigan, and I'm excited to be your MC for the day. The Michigan Online Visionary Educators, or MOVE series, is hosted by the Center for Academic Innovation at the University of Michigan. An important part of our mission is to create a more global and inclusive learning community. We believe an informed, peaceful, and equitable society is dependent on learners everywhere adopting a learning lifestyle. This monthly series will feature experts sharing insights, tools, and discussions on issues relevant to the lives of people around the world. Many of the speakers may be familiar to you as the faculty behind some of our most successful and innovative learning experiences available through Michigan Online. For information on our upcoming MOVE series, be sure to check out the schedule at online.umich.edu/move. A couple of housekeeping items for today. Today, we invite you to submit your questions for our panelists in the Q&A section, and they'll do their best to answer as many as they can. Given our limited time, we ask that you keep your questions related to the topic. Today's event will be recorded, and the recording will be made available on Michigan Online. Now to introduce our speakers for today. Today, we're joined by Elisabeth Gerber, Professor of Public Policy and Faculty Innovator in Residence at the Center for Academic Innovation. We're also joined by MS Christian, Accenture Professor of Computer and Information Systems and Professor of Technology and Operations at the Stephen M. Ross School of Business. I'm also excited to be joined today by Aaron Davola, the Vice President of Sustainability at Siemens Digital Industries, and our moderator, Jen Bradford, the Global Business Strategy Manager also from Siemens Digital Industries. At this time, I'll hand it off to Jen. Jen, take it away.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Monica. And thanks to Elisabeth and MS and Aaron. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today. I think we will maybe jump right in and kind of establish a baseline, maybe some terminology. So Aaron, maybe talk to us about what is electrification? What does that mean? Oop, you're muted, Aaron.
So always a technical difficulty to start today. So what I was starting to say is that electrification in 2022 is a lot different than it maybe was in the early 19th century, where it really meant focusing on getting electricity to communities that didn't have it. What we mean when we refer to electrification in this context is moving away from fossil fuel-based industries and moving them to electricity-based industries. This is an important aspect because we have the ability to really reduce the carbon footprint of industries like transportation, like we're talking about today, but also chemical production and such. They produce about 65% of the total carbon in the United States. And if we can move those off of fossil fuel onto clean electric fuels, then we can really drive down the greenhouse gas emissions and really help drive some more sustainable practices in our businesses.
That's great, Aaron. Thank you so much. So kind of a baseline there. And MS, maybe you can talk about how you think that this trend toward electrification and this mandate to electrification will really broadly transform manufacturing.
Thank you, Jen. First of all, I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to participate. As Aaron mentioned about what electrification today is, and then its impact on the transportation industry and how we're changing, we're seeing the changes around us. Certainly, it is very clear, all of us are convinced that electrification in terms of, let's say, the transportation industry, it's good. I mean, because it is a sustainable solution. We know that it'll reduce the carbon footprint. And so the case that we should be there is very, very clear out there. At the same time, if you look at an electric automobile today, everybody who's driving one, which is working well, I think likes it, because this automobile that we have is fundamentally a different product as compared to what has been there, not only in terms of how it impacts the society, how it impacts the sustainability goals, but also in terms of the convenience for the customers, right? In terms of you don't have to smell the gasoline, you don't, and then more and more these vehicles are now emerging as what I would call as not just an automobile or like a mobility solution, but you consume entertainment services in that. The future path to electrification or the energy storage is that these vehicles could actually become energy storing units or even energy generating units, right? In terms of the path now. So the business case is very, very clear. Customers are going to like it, and it is good for the society, good for the environment. But the challenge is you got to get it done at a reasonable price point. Okay, that's where the impact comes to manufacturing, because the business case is very, very clear. Okay, that if you produce a product like this, everybody's going to latch on to it. Okay, they're just going to immediately buy it. No matter how many you can produce. So coming back to your question about how it changes manufacturing now. I believe that is fundamentally going to shift how we understand manufacturing traditionally. A lot of credits to great manufacturing practices that have evolved right from scale manufacturing of Model T here in Michigan 100 years back. We have Lean, we have Toyota way, we have GM way, all different ways. We have standard manufacturing processes that have been kind of perfected over time. But with electrification, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see the impact of digital technology coming in both from the demand side and also from the supply side. Let me explain that. From the demand side, I think more and more in these electric vehicles or electric instruments that we have, the interface with the customer or the user is going to be more software driven. Okay, and that means there's a lot more opportunity for personalization. So that side of this, the vehicle is going to be more software driven, more digitally driven. That's number one. And so the design of the vehicle has to take care of that. Now, coming back to the supply side, in electric vehicles, for example, we all talk about the electric cars, how the automobile industry is going to change. But then one of the key metrics every customer, every manufacturer is worried about is what we call as a drive range, which is how many miles does a vehicle drive for a single charge. That comes back to the technology that's used in electrification. Now, in order to achieve that best number, right, in terms of what is the kind of miles that a particular vehicle can drive, it actually now goes back to multiple things, right? For example, if you have to kind of design a vehicle and you have to control the cost, as I said, you got to be, cost cannot be exorbitant for the demand to be there. But then you also come into some, I would say, more physics constraints, right? Because the battery packs, the powertrain coming from battery in electric vehicles are much heavier than traditional vehicles we had. Okay, that means once they are heavier, of course, for a drive range to be higher, you need to have lighter vehicles, is it not? That means that the manufacturers are imposed with the constraints to invent new materials, invent new designs, so that they can actually reduce the total weight of the vehicle. Okay, that can carry the battery pack and have a good drive range for the customers to be happy and buy the vehicle, right? That's the challenge. Now, in order to achieve this, you have to completely rethink manufacturing. That's where the concepts like digital twins, the ability to kind of simulate the entire vehicle or either the product or the process, and then do a lot of what-if analysis for you to kind of, test out the scenarios even before designing. That cuts the cost. So you need to think about digital technology like digital twins, new generative designs and 3D printing and additive manufacturing techniques, which allows you to come out with new design of products, new materials, which are much lighter and more powerful, or, the weight to performance ratio is much, much better than what we have today. And of course, intelligent manufacturing in terms of more connected supply chains end to end, which actually all together they can actually allow you to kind of reduce the cost, increase the performance of the vehicles, at the same time, reduce the weight, and so that you have a much better performance coming out of the manufacturing plant. And that cannot be delivered by the traditional way we have looked at supply chain or manufacturing. So these things come together to, I would say, it's going to transform manufacturing from the point of view of completely looking through the digital lens. How can we use new technologies to completely rethink this? Because, believe it or not, this is the first time that a lot of manufacturers have got a clean slate in hand. Okay, it's a completely clean slate because these vehicles and these units are completely different, and so they get to start with a clean slate. When you start with a clean slate, then you completely rethink how you manufacture, right? And that's where the digital technologies come in place. And it is not all about only auto companies, right? It's a complete ecosystem. I mean, it is not about cars. It's electric scooters, bikes. It's a complete ecosystem that is evolving from a battery pack, production, like on the supplier side. If you think about battery pack, what's happening is there's a lot of innovation that is required there. We are still discovering a lot, okay? And that requires, again, digital solutions, because if you look at simulating, the cell geometry, how do you pack the cell in such a way that you get high energy, within that space that you're so all these things, again, require digital technology for you to simulate and do a lot of runs before you actually kind of commit to a particular design. And also there is a lot of co-creation between manufacturers and suppliers. I think even it'll change the global supply chains, because you would see some of these manufacturing coming back to the US, and also manufacturers looking for new geographical locations, because now they're going to look at, where these materials required for battery are. So this is going to change the global supply chain. Restructure this, and also, kind of shift the way we did manufacturing, both from a supply chain standpoint and also how you manage within a plant. So lots of changes in terms of how digital technology is going to, fundamentally reintroduce how we think about manufacturing.
So maybe as an off-script follow-up question for you, Christian, are you seeing trends in manufacturing that talk a little bit more about end of life or disassembly? Are you seeing that kind of coming into the picture as we move to electrification?
Absolutely. So just to kind of clarification of questions, end of life in the sense that what do you do with the the vehicles on the ground route? Yes, there is. Electrification is also leading to what I would call as a circular economy, kind of, where just to explain what circular economy means to others, basically this is about recycling. Okay, you want to kind of extract the materials out of the vehicles on the ground. And for example, the catalytic converters in cars have a lot of rare elements, right? And kind of, or precision metals. How do you kind of globally orchestrate the supply chain so that you're able to kind of extract this out? And end of life value, to your point, yes, it is also coming up in terms of not only extending what we have on the ground, but also making the best use of the previous technology we had.
All while making sure that it's still fun to drive, fun to ride, right?
Absolutely. I drive an electric car. I can tell you it is fun to drive, and it is fun to own too. Yeah.
So I think that's a good transition. And, in talking about vehicles being fun to drive, Elisabeth, maybe you can talk with us about, what are some of the transformations that we're seeing in, a really core industry in the US like automotive? What does that look like right now?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jen. And hello, everybody. Very glad to be here. And thanks to my colleagues also for getting this conversation going. I feel like I can just jump right into it. So certainly when we look at the automotive sector as part of the broader transportation sector, I would say it's safe to say that the era of electric vehicles has arrived. In 2021, EV sales doubled over 2020 to about, I was just reading about this, I didn't realize it had been that large, but to 6.5 million vehicles in 2021. China is the largest market, followed by Europe, followed by the US. In the US alone, the EV sales also doubled up to 608,000 vehicles. Now, electric vehicles only account for about 9% of all vehicles on the road. But with that growth, I think it's clear to say that a lot of things are coming into place so that electric vehicles really are going to be a viable strategy, a viable form of transportation for many people. Now, there are a lot of things that are holding it back. The most of which is, as Christian mentioned, cost. So EVs are expensive. There's really not an aftermarket. So you've got to buy them new at this point. And so a lot of people in the US and worldwide are effectively priced out of that market right now. A lot of that has to do with public policy. So currently the US government subsidizes the purchase of expensive electric vehicles. So they're actually subsidizing rich people to buy expensive cars. And it makes sense to do that on some level because getting electric vehicles on the road and sort of opening that market, and then having everything else that is required to support those vehicles, like charging infrastructure, like parts suppliers, like getting manufacturers to rethink their entire manufacturing process, both the OEMs and then also suppliers. Also companies like software companies, as Krishan mentioned, this is really a software industry now, automotive. And so all of that is sort of organizing itself as the first set of electric vehicles are hitting the roads. But as they do, I think it's really an important challenge for all of us to be thinking about what needs to happen to make those vehicles more affordable so that we can go from 9% to a much greater percentage of vehicles. Cars and light trucks account for 29% of global greenhouse gas emissions currently. That's a lot. And so in order to meet some of the climate and sustainability goals that I know we all think and talk about, we have to do something about auto emissions. Now, one of the other challenges, though, that I want to make sure we put on the table is that currently electric vehicles are powered by batteries, and batteries are powered by electricity. And how is electricity generated? Mostly by coal. And so what we're doing is transferring where carbon is being burned from within the internal combustion engines to power plants that are used to charge the electric batteries, the electric vehicle batteries. And so thinking about moving the electricity generation and thinking also about the challenges for the grid, if we're going to be needing to charge so many additional vehicles as they shift to electric, that has real challenges for the grid, but also converting a lot of the electricity generation also to renewables, I think is something that we need to really be thinking about. So yes, absolutely, the auto industry is changing. There are something like at least 400 new models, like well along in testing of electric vehicles right now. So I think we're going to see an explosion of options that consumers will have for purchasing electric vehicles in the future. Maybe they'll be less expensive than the ones that are currently available. I think they'll have to be to penetrate the market. But the sustainability questions are still really challenging because we've also got to figure out not just how to put batteries in cars and make them more efficient, but also how to charge them, where to invest in charging infrastructure, and then how to modernize our electricity grid so that we're less reliant on carbon there as well.
Boy, those are a lot of great points to think about. Erin, do you have any follow-up to
I got maybe a couple of things to just elaborate on. I'm really agree with everything that Liz just shared, but in the infrastructure space, you really have to look at two things. And I think it's really from a social economic perspective to look at where are we currently putting charging stations? Are they supporting the entire diverse communities of which that people actually live and drive in, or are they really central at places that maybe are a little bit more affluent? And I think that that's something we need to really look at, is where are we putting charging stations? Where are we building infrastructure? And then how are we charging that infrastructure? Because in order to use a lot of renewable energy, you have to have good energy storage solutions and grid storage solutions. And that's a place where when we look at this push to electrification, there have been a lot of ripples into, so the e-mobility trend has driven industry wide and broad through that, the sort of ecosystem approach or ecosystem view that Christian mentioned earlier, which is that in order to have electric vehicles, we have to have infrastructure, which includes both charging stations and then the grid infrastructure to support them. And those are challenges that we at Siemens are working on in one of our smart infrastructure divisions, but those are things that really need solved for the greater solution. I can't just make a car or a scooter or some sort of vehicle and not have the rest of the pieces that go together. So I think that downstream infrastructure is a really important codependency. I think the other one that Liz touched on is the batteries. Battery production has historically been very dirty, very inefficient, poor first pass yield, and then very low percentages of recyclability. And the technology in those spaces, and also very heavy. So when you look at those places, how are we really driving industry there? And some of the things that you're seeing is because of the big commitments that automakers in particular have made to electrification. You see these gigafactories being funded. They're being built up in Asia and Europe. And one of the things that we need to do is really help enable them with the right digital tools to make the digital twins, as Christian mentioned, in manufacturing, so you get them designed right, and you're able to then connect them so they can start designing for not just the profitability side as an outcome, but looking at the sustainability side as an outcome. Yesterday's waste has to be tomorrow's resource. So how are we turning that in designing recyclability at the beginning? How are we connecting a battery manufacturer to a battery recycler? And then how are we advancing technology? I actually had the opportunity just this morning to talk to a gentleman from Gerber Engineering, which is out of Switzerland, and they do a Simrod car for fun, but they also do a lot of electric postal vehicles. And one of the things that they're talking about is how to reuse a complete battery cell and advancing that technology in an open, unprotected way so the whole community and the whole infrastructure can benefit from that. And that really open connectivity is important for our long-term success, because the infrastructure side is tied to the battery side, is tied to the vehicle side. These things are all interconnected. And maybe one other thing I could point the participants to is there's a project that's driven by automotive called Katina X, which is really trying to do that, trying to drive connectivity across all of the stakeholders in mobility, and specifically in e-mobility. And that connectivity, I think, for automotive and really for all industries is going to be so important in the future. How we exchange data, as Christian said earlier, these are really complex problems. These are really data intensive things. And maybe the good news is we have the tools and the ability to process data in a way we didn't 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that gives us the power, if we work together, to really solve these hard, complicated problems. So maybe that was more than your 10-second follow-up word, but I really feel strongly about some of these things. Is really getting connected is the way that we can get there. Is working together is the only way to be successful.
Yeah.
Jen, if I may, just want to add you go ahead, please.
Just to follow up, I think maybe Christian, we might have the same kind of comment, but I just wanted to echo what Erin is saying, and our friends and colleagues at Siemens are doing an amazing job certainly on the digital tools side. I also want to make an extra shout out to some of our colleagues at the University of Michigan, where a lot of the battery technology and battery recycling research is going on. So those of you that are interested, just type University of Michigan battery and like 80 things will come up. So a whole lot going on here on campus, but I totally agree that this collaborative approach where industry and academics and community organizations and other stakeholders are all having the same conversation and are bringing different pieces to the table to try to get right, not just the engineering and the technology, but also to make sure that the impacts on communities and other interested stakeholders are deliberate, that the technology that isn't just going to happen. We've got to decide how to deploy it and how to leverage it and how to incentivize it and so on. We as decision makers and as people, as stakeholders. So anyway, just lots and lots of really cool stuff on the battery side at the University of Michigan. Check it out.
Yeah, I just want to thanks Elisabeth. I just want to add further, Jen, on the impact of communities. We just trying to kind of it's a lot of excitement about the electrification of vehicles and electric vehicles coming in, and then about battery technologies and things like that. But I think we also need to remember that there is an impact on the community in terms of our current manufacturing of the non-electric vehicles. Being in Michigan, we cannot ignore automotive industry, right? It employs thousands of people in the traditional manufacturing of the ICE vehicles, right? When you think about electrification, electric vehicles, I think there's a lot of fundamental changes here. First, start with the number of parts that are required in an electric vehicle. It drastically reduces, right? And you have skilled workers who kind of skilled in manufacturing the old way, the kind of ICE engine. So, the shift from, especially for legacy auto companies, the shift from ICE kind of vehicles to the electrification jump is easier said than done. I mean, they have to be, at the same time, they have to look at the demand side of it. That's what customers want. They move there, but how do they take the existing systems, including the people? That's where the importance of reskilling and upskilling and all these things come in, so that we actually carry all these people in terms of for their skills and then expose them. That's where the academia and industry partnership all comes in, where we can actually create opportunities for them in the new areas and the new industry that are opening up that Erin mentioned about, that it is battery manufacturing. I mean, in fact, there's no opportunity to make manufacturing cleaner, faster, cheaper with digital technology. And that's exactly where we are going. I think that has to be kept in mind in terms of our responsibility for the broader community as we take along to this transition.
Thank you, Krishnan. I think that those are all excellent points that you guys have raised. So we've got a question from the audience here. I'm going to come back to our agreed upon questions, but this one seems timely. It's about, when do we expect to see some change in the electric vehicle aftermarket? When do we expect to see them available? Will there be consumer confidence in buying, kind of older batteries? What do you imagine that is going to look like?
Well, if you actually, I can take that as I do own an electric vehicle, right? So
use your crystal ball, Krishna, and tell us.
Right, exactly. I think it is. It'll go with the manufacturer's warranty. I mean, right now, I think the life is 8 to 10 years. That's what they give, right? I mean, so at the same time, going back to, I think one of the points I think Elisabeth made earlier is we need to remember and understand that these electric vehicles are not cars as we used to think about them. They are actually computers in some sense. I call them software on wheels. Okay, so I would not expect the same kind of price range in which kind of depreciation. The depreciation may be sharper with more number of years in the vehicle. Just like you will not be able to sell a computer which is 5 years old, right? I mean, kind of the rate at which technology. The two things are going to happen, right? One is in terms of the viability and the quality of the existing, the automobile that you're trying to sell, okay, in terms of what will be the life from the battery and all those things. That's one piece of that. But from the demand side, the rate at which the technology is going to, improve, right? I mean, kind of a lot of work going on there, innovation, on the demand side. So obviously, the price performance ratio of the new vehicles coming in could be much, much better than what we saw 3 years back, right? So both the equations are kind of going to affect these, pricing of the and availability of the aftermarket. Is availability? Yes. Used electric vehicles are available today. I mean, there are transactions going on, okay? And the question is, will it pick up? And I think the two forces will actually kind of balance out. And that's where we'll land to an equilibrium. I think there will be a market because, we are going to kind of look at the life of batteries at least 8 to 10 years. And that's a time span where there at least one resale of the vehicle can happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think also to Krishnan's point that, I think the aftermarket takes a little bit longer to catch on. It's a new technology, and once you get past those early adopters, those who have the financial means bought one new, those that don't might be waiting for these aftermarkets, but it's going to take a little while for people to feel good about that. If you think about it, even like when a new brand of vehicle comes out, I remember when the Hyundais first kind of made a new splash in the US, maybe 15, 20 years ago, and they've offered these really extended warranties. And for a long time, it took people a while to catch on. And then that brand has really flourished in the market based on being able to put that reputation and that use out there. And I think that will happen a bit in this space as well as we move forward, as people kind of transition. And I think also seeing and feeling like you have the right infrastructure really helps drive people to some of these electric vehicle aftermarket purchases.
Yeah. Just on that last point, so in the Biden-Harris bipartisan infrastructure law that passed earlier in the year, there's $7.5 billion for EV charging infrastructure. That's a lot. Now, $7.5 billion, you can blow it quickly. But if well spent, that is actually, I think, going to make a significant improvement in the availability of charging infrastructure, at least for long distance driving, which is where most people are so concerned. And so I do think that that's a big piece of sort of driving people to electric vehicles. Driving, I don't mean that in a vehicle sense, but moving people to this technology and creating confidence in it, which I think is going to then really increase demand for used vehicles and broader purchases by a broader segment of the consumer markets of electric vehicles. I do think that from a technology perspective, it's really going to be battery technology that determines when and how used EV sales are going to take place. So, currently we don't have great strategies for replacement batteries for, new batteries in used vehicles. And I think that, as I understand it, that's a technology that a lot of people are working on and thinking about, but that's going to be really critical, bringing down the cost of batteries so that after the 8 to 10 years, as Krishna was saying, of the life of the original battery, that you don't have to send the car to the trash heap at that point, that there's an additional life that you can add in. And I know there are some replacement batteries, but they're really not at scale and available in an economical way. So to my mind, that's the technology. You've got the investment in the infrastructure, and then you've got the technology piece with the battery and the battery technology that is going to be really key.
And then the short answer, Jen, I would say is that, will that happen? And my answer is yes, and it is happening already. The way to think about it is your electric car is actually an expensive smartphone. There is a market for a huge smartphone today, right?
Sure. That's an interesting and a good way to think about it. Any follow-up comments, Erin?
One thing I would just add, I'd forgotten, I thought I wrote it down, but I didn't. But the other thing that Christian mentioned that kind of resonated with me is that one of the things that you're seeing is that it is like a big computer, but one of the things that you can do with a phone or a computer is give updates. So one of the things that I think will be happening is you'll be keeping hardware and getting new software in your vehicle in a way in the future, a way to extend life cycles of the physical asset by refreshing it as a more interactive asset and having the ability to make other sort of retrofit type upgrades to mobility tools, whether those are scooters or those are traditional automobiles, but those are ways really to drive that circular economy that Christian mentioned earlier, to be able to use things as long as humanly possible. Then when you're done using them, know what to do with them next. We definitely see that as a trend overall in all of industry, but one that I think will also be adapted into e-mobility moving forward.
So it sounds like we're going to replace our oil changes with firmware updates. And
absolutely, it is already happening. Jen, it is already happening, right? I mean, if you have a Tesla and you buy that, the full service or whatever the features they sell you, then your car is actually improving every month or every 2 months. And so even, it'll be applicable, depending upon the manufacturer's policies, even if you resell the vehicle and to another owner, then, they're still, the intelligence in the product is growing. It is not the same product. So that's going to be different. I think I will actually kind of maybe other panelists I think one concern which I've not seen in the policy implications is, we are in the beginning of this, this explosion or, of the electric vehicles, right? So what happens in 10 years from now when we have all these used batteries coming out of these vehicles, and what is the policy implications of that? And that's not my area, but that's always comes to my mind as an issue around that, related to that question, actually.
I think that that's a huge concern, because I believe the batteries we have today were not designed for recyclability. And that's a little bit the challenge, that we're going to have this heap that was done before we put these design practices and tools in place. And that I believe we'll see an evolution to 100% recyclable battery that will happen over the next 10 to 15 years. But in the meantime, we're going to have to contend with the fact that, right now we have recyclers like this company Redux that we work with out of Europe that takes any type of scooter battery, automotive battery, and they do a group recycling. The challenge is because they have such a mixed intake and they're using chemistry to separate elements and get those recyclable pieces. It's really it's better than putting it in a trash heap, but only incrementally, right? The best thing to be able to do is to find a way to reuse that cell as a complete cell, and then ultimately to reuse that battery as a complete battery with some amount of refurbishment or to extend its life cycle altogether. But I absolutely agree that we're going to have a trash problem to contend with. I also think that one of the challenges we have with some of these things is we're moving away from a climate producing resource, a limited natural resource, to another limited natural resource, which are the metals that go into these batteries. So if we don't find a way to either reuse what we've already used or to extract back out of products and landfills the things that we've got there, we're going to run out of that too. Like, there's only so many, as someone said this to me the other day, there's only so many atoms out there in the universe. They're limited. So we need to figure out how to really take that waste to resource cycle in a meaningful way. And that's a big challenge. And there's pockets of people doing brilliant things around that, and pockets where we need to do more brilliant things around that.
Well said.
So this conversation is bringing to my mind a quote from the late great Carl Sagan, who said, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you have to invent the universe. So it really sounds like in order to invent electrification, I know, right? Like in order to, to sort of bake electrification, we have to invent a whole universe in terms of economic, policy, social implications, infrastructure. So maybe you guys can kind of take turns going around and what do you believe that industries and society as a whole can be doing right now to invent that universe?
So I think the big thing is doing something to use less every day. There was a quote from a cook that I love, and I wish I could remember the name, but saving the planet doesn't take a few people doing it perfectly. It takes everybody doing it imperfectly. And I think that that's a place where if you can do something to use less, reuse more, that's something that will always help. And I know it sounds very idealistic and whatnot, but it's really those small things that make a difference in the long run. I think spending time in considering, no matter what product you might wind up designing as part of your career, or what policy you might work to influence, or what business you might be working to support, think about what the long-term implications are. This is deep thinking. It's really thinking 2 or 3 to 5 to 25 steps ahead, but being able to put those considerations into your thinking now in whatever type of professional role you have or professional role you're working to achieve. If you think about what that impact is to our natural resources, you'll always get a little bit further ahead than if you didn't.
Interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
I love that. Thank you for that, Erin. I'm going to try to remember that in my own life. So I appreciate that. I'll come at this with my public policy cap on and just sort of make the point that technology does not produce benefit. People produce benefit with technology as tools. And how we use technology, like electrification technology, for example. Electrification has incredible potential to help reduce climate change and lots of other things, like dependence on non-renewable resources in various ways, and pollution and health and disease or poor health and disease that come from burning of carbon. And the technology gives us the potential to make those quality of life improvements, but they don't happen by themselves. People have to act on them. So Erin is pointing out that we, individual people, can do that. Governments have an important, very important role in that also. And so, and some governments are really forward thinking and have prioritized, reducing the impact on the climate, reducing carbon, and being proactive actors in that, in all of those activities, but many have not. And so I think all of us as people who live in places, who are residents and perhaps citizens of the places in which they live, can and should be advocating for policies that prioritize transitions away from the status quo and to using technologies for the better. So we can't just be mad that our policymakers aren't doing enough. We have responsibilities also to encourage them in the many ways that we can. And so I would encourage us to think about both as individuals, but then also as global citizens, like what can we be advocating for on a policy level that will also make big change.
Yeah, I will, completely agree with both the points by Erin and Elizabeth. I'll just add that I believe that we need what is called as the systems thinking approach, where you need to have multi-stakeholder engagement, right? In terms of, you have to look at the full impact, as even Erin's earlier point that, we can rush to electric vehicles, but then what does it do to the environment, over time, in terms of, are we kind of depleting, one instead of the other in terms of resources? So I think we need that. And as a business, I think you think beyond the current business and stakeholder, which is really important for you to survive as a business, but actually more, that's why sustainability becomes an important goal. I mean, it's baked into the strategy of companies. And that too, I would say more broadly in the systems thinking, what I mean is that holistic approach where you connect different pieces together. One part of it is not just the technology and the value to the customers, but you also need to take the community with you, right? I mean, there is the people who have been working, people who have been, trained in, technologies, and how are they going to be, shifted now? What implication does it going to have? What kind of incentives are we going to generate for that? And certainly the point where we are, it is, I think it's very clear that moving to electric vehicles certainly is going to, improve the carbon footprint. There's no doubt about that. And the implications of what happens, if you don't have, if you kind of run with the, batteries that are not recyclable, and what does it do to the environment later? I mean, those things have to be thought about. And of course, so we need to, the innovation again has to connect back to the systems thinking approach, where you look at the entire impact on the society and the entire environment. Everything is connected, right? And what impact does it have? I think that's how we need to think about it. And we as individually have roles to play. Just each single butterfly, flapping the wings, it helps, correct, the right direction. Yeah.
So I want to maybe shift to some of the questions that we've seen come in from the audience, both in the pre-registration and more currently. So a great transition question here. How does electrification help solve our global climate problem? Does it help achieve any of the sustainable development goals? And if so, how? Anybody want to jump into that one?
So if done correctly, it can enable us to really to hit climate action, which I think is goal number, let's go 13, 14, or 15. I don't have them quite memorized, but I know them well. And that's really the long-term goal. But as I think Liz mentioned earlier, it's a complex view, because you have to not just look at how much electricity you're not, or how much fossil fuel you're not putting into the vehicle. You also have to look at how is the electricity that you're using being manufactured. Are we using some type of fossil fuel or CO2 generating process to get there? And that's what makes it, as Krishna just said again, it's really a systems of systems. You really have to look at all the implications, but this is an enabler that will help feed other enablers. So if we never moved off of fossil fuels for vehicles or for e-mobility, then the other pieces don't matter so much, right? Like you don't need a charging station. So how you're powering that charging station doesn't matter. It just highlights that you have problems along the way. So I would say that the real move here is to drive us to climate action. And then hopefully, as we have this bigger data, we have these more connected ecosystems and these systems of systems, that we're able then to make better decisions and then drive overall the circular economy, which is less use. And I think the other piece of it is then looking at, if we're displacing workers, how are we driving a skill set from doing an oil change, to your point, Jen, earlier, to having that same person upskilled to be able to do upgrades and software on those same vehicles, and that there is going to be a market for that. Someone who's driving and managing the local grid storage and those types of things. So I think there are new jobs that come, but really a lot of this move is focused on that climate action piece of the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Very good. Any other comments?
What she said.
Yeah. No, I think I'll just I'll add a couple of more points. I mean, certainly climate benefits, we all know it's a long-term, it's got its impact. I would actually add to that in terms of, I think there are also short-term benefits, right? In terms of along the way as we go there. Like, for example, I can look at, I can see healthcare. I mean, look at emerging countries, right? I mean, the amount of pollution that is generated by, gasoline vehicles, right? Or diesel vehicles. And then the health impact on citizens there, right? That's a huge, kind of outcome of electrification of transportation, I would say, because I can just tell you that, I give you one personal experience. Like, I've had this electric vehicle for the last 3 years now. Now, if you recall, about 10, 15 years back in this country, smoking was kind of very publicly, in public places, smoking was allowed. You remember what I'm talking about, right? Like you go to restaurants, and maybe 15 years back, right? And you remember those, you go to if you're not a smoker, and then you go there, oh, it's kind of smelling, right? I mean, so, and it's interesting now, you drive an electric vehicle and then you go to the gas station and you smell the gas, okay? And because that has a health impact on it. And I think that has significant implications for emerging markets to start with, I would say, because of the population density there, and and then the explosion in terms of different kinds of vehicles, not just cars, scooters, two-wheelers, all these things. They are all running on gasoline, diesel. Just imagine if you can convert them to electric. And when earlier I said it's an ecosystem, right? I think that will have a significant impact in terms of short-term health benefit. Of course, obviously, long-term, climate and other sustainability benefits as well.
So I'll go next, Liz, and then I saw your hand up as well. But to Christian's point, we have a customer at Siemens that we've worked with in Canada called Lion Electric that moved their buses. So they run school bus routes, and they moved all of those to electric. And that many of the benefits are that the kids aren't standing out there at the bus stop getting kind of inundated with pollution as they go to get on that. And I do think we've got some opportunities where we've been able to electrify our diesel locomotives and look at that public transportation piece and how we already have a lot of pollutants, a lot of density in cities. And the more we can take some of that CO2 production out of those cities with electric vehicles, whether they be personal vehicles or mass transit type vehicles, is really an overall supportive of a cleaner atmosphere for people to live in.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Erin, that's totally hitting on one of the other SDGs, the sustainable cities, right? So
it just took me a minute to get to that one.
And I don't remember which one that is, but y'all know it. Which
I'll
one?
Look it up later.
10 maybe. So I am absolutely shocked that we've gone 57 minutes talking about electric vehicles without talking about automation, because of course, that's the other gigantic technological change that's happening in the automotive sector, in the automotive industry, and mobility broadly. And so I was actually also thinking about the sustainable cities element and thinking about not just how electrification may help advance that SDG, but also automation, where we're further off. I would say that the age of autonomous vehicles has not quite yet arrived, as I boldly claimed the age of electric vehicles has. But there's certainly a lot of R&D going on and pilot projects. And I'm sure everybody on this call has their own stories about why they do or don't think autonomous vehicles are a good idea. Maybe that can be the topic for another webinar. But in any case, in so many theories of the future, models of the future, these two technologies will be combined. And so I do think it makes sense to think about both electrification and automation as potentially providing great social benefits, but with all the same kinds of caveats that we're talking about here. It's not going to happen just because we have this great technology. We've got to make decisions as communities, as society, about how to deploy, how to regulate, how to incentivize, how to develop the infrastructure to support that additional technology as well. So anyway, I couldn't not talk about automation at least a little while we're talking about technological advances in the auto industry. Sorry.
Liz, it's almost like we're working on a new course together that addresses these very.
Oh, wait, what? So we should plug our courses though, because Krishna, you've got, do you want to, I'm sorry to take your stage, Jen, but
No.
Krishna, do you want to talk about your course at all?
Sure,
or-
yeah, absolutely. We have, thanks, support from Siemens. We've launched a series on future of manufacturing in terms of how digital technology will transform manufacturing. So this series has got 3 courses on in Industrial Internet of Things, IIoT, and manufacturing, and then digital twins. We talked about it today, and also additive manufacturing. So, and they are already available in Michigan Online and Coursera. I think there are already more than 5,000, 6,000 students who've been enrolled in that train.
Nice.
Thanks.
I just dropped a link to that course in the chat, although it looks like I only sent it to Erin because I don't really understand how. Let me fix
And
that.
then while Jen's figuring out the
There it is.
technology, I'll just mention a second course that I'm working on, also in partnership with Siemens, called People, Technology, and the Future of Mobility, where we're talking about electrification and vehicle automation as transforming the mobility sector. That one is still in development, and it should drop in late August.
Great.
Also on Coursera and Michigan Online.
Look at this. We have managed to wrap up the conversation with 1 minute to go. So lightning round, final takeaways, 1 or 2 points each of you. Start with Erin.
Do something small every day to be more sustainable. And when you look at a problem, try and look deep as you can.
Good. Liz.
Wow, that was really beautiful, Erin.
That's why I like to go first.
I think this is a very exciting time, and I think people are nervous about change and how technology, we have these dystopian views of the future, but I really do think that if people are mindful about who is going to enjoy the benefits and who is going to pay the costs, broadly defined, of electrification technology, I do think that this sector, particularly transportation and mobility, it's got a really, really exciting future.
And Krishna.
I think digital technology and software is going to transform our society and business as we live in. So it's our responsibility to prepare ourselves, update ourselves, and also help others prepare them.
I love that. Thank you guys so much. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation, and I will hand it back over to you, Monica.
Jen and all of our panelists, thank you so much for joining today and sharing your stories, insight, and wisdom. Your perspectives on how we can come together as a learning community, as a university and industry partners to impact the future of technology is certainly inspiring. You've challenged us as global citizens to look at the trends and think about how we can create a better society at the intersection of sustainability, business, and government in this changing ecosystem of transportation and mobility. To all our participants, thank you all for joining as well. We have a couple of things to share today. One is that the MOVE series will be taking a break for the summer. Check out online.umich.edu/move later this summer for updates and also the upcoming fall MOVE event schedule. You can also follow Michigan Online on a variety of our social media platforms. And we appreciate you, including, I should mention about Michigan Online, as our faculty panelists mentioned, we have for University of Michigan and Siemens joint learning experiences on the digital technologies and the future of manufacturing available on Coursera. And Professor Elisabeth Gerber will be releasing another series later this year on mobility. So we hope that you'll stay tuned for all of that. These super exciting courses that provide a much more in-depth look at some of the topics that we talked about today. We appreciate you joining and submitting your questions today. If this topic was of interest to you, again, check out Michigan Online for our courses. These courses will be emailed to you along with a recording of this webinar. This takes us to the end of today's MOVE series event, and we thank you again so much for joining us.